we'll cut out all the lead
Okay.
time from it. So we are recording now. And will you just say your name so I can test the sound levels?
Okay. Cameron Howard.
Yeah, that should be just fine.
Okay. And I should look at you, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. That's probably
That's
the
fine.
best way to do this.
Okay.
We'll do it like interview style. Okay. I'm just pulling up the questions.
Sure, take your time. I'm sorry to spring it on you.
No, this is great. You're doing a great favor for me. Did you hear about this chap at Princeton who died? This professor? Did you know? Do you know who that is?
Is that Mari, who's a PhD student here's husband?
Oh, I don't actually know.
Or the name was spelled M-A-R-I, and she's from
I
South
really don't
Africa.
know. Okay. She's from South
South
America?
Africa.
South Africa. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if they're
Yeah, maybe the same person. I know that he has some really close ties here, though.
Yeah.
So. Okay, are you ready? Okay, we'll start.
Sure.
And we'll give you a countdown in 3, 2, 1. Well, Dr. Howard, welcome to this interview session. I'm delighted to have you here and delighted that you were willing to talk with us. As you know, I'm teaching a class this semester on the book of Daniel. And you're also teaching a class this semester on empire, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the official title?
The Bible and Empire.
Okay, right. So actually, I think there's a lot of interesting overlap in our two courses. You are kind of dealing with it on a broad stroke level, and then, as you know, the book of Daniel is in the thick of empire, in fact, a number of empires. So given that you've worked on this for a couple of years, I was hoping just to ask you some questions that we can reflect on, use for reflections in my own class. So let's start with something really, I think the question is simple, but I'm not sure if the answer is really that simple. What is empire?
Yeah, I think it is a very complicated answer, but I think, first of all, most fundamentally, there is a central power, which historically has been a nation state of some kind, that has annexed and has power over diverse peoples and territories.
Mm-hmm.
So one sort of centralized, smaller group ruling over many diverse others.
Yeah.
I think that that the empire doesn't have to be a nation state anymore. I think that's one trajectory for discussion. But no matter what, I think empires operate on extraction. This is a term that I got from an article by John Berquist, and I just love it because I think it really captures how empires work.
And John Berquist being a biblical scholar.
Yes.
Who works in the Persian period.
Yes, and does some
apocalypticism.
sociological approaches. So that empires they extract resources of all kinds from those territories that they are taking over. And so in order to sustain themselves, empires have to keep extracting. So if you think in concentric circles, say, and you've got the empire in the middle and they've taken over one sort of level of territory, well, to maintain control over that territory, they need armies. They need food for the armies. They need resources for the center So in order to get that, they got to go out and get some more territory because now we've got more people, and so we need more food and we need more armies. And it's sort of self-perpetuating. It's always growing.
So it's not just about material goods then. There are other sorts of things that the beast might be
Oh,
devouring.
absolutely. I mean, I think actually we can go to 1 Samuel 8 for a wonderful summary of how an empire works, because when the people ask for a king and Samuel says, this is what a king will do, a king will take, right? And I think it's about 10 uses of that verb, take, or take a tenth. And so take your crops, take your material goods, but also take your sons to be in his armies, to take your daughters to be bakers and cook. I mean, lots of taking. Natural resources, human resources.
So there's almost no limit to what the empire might desire or take from.
Right.
different people. Wow, that's interesting. And I guess when you think about this idea of empire, what are some of the iconic images, I guess ancient and modern, that come into your own mind when you think about empire?
I think of Rome, first
Oh,
of all,
yeah.
the sort of Colosseum and the arch. I mean, the arch from, the Roman Empire gave us, right?
Yes.
The arch.
Not the
which
golden
sometimes
arches,
people
but
right. Although
that's another kind of empire.
a student in my class who has a degree in political science talks about the empire of the golden arches, or the soft empire or something. I forget the exact phrase he uses, but yes.
Oh, that's remarkable.
That that's quite an empire. But that we could call that a benefit or sort of a byproduct of empire. Architecture, culture, a lot of music and literature has come out of empires, and so that gets at a question, is an empire. I have been defining an empire as sort of fundamentally a bad thing.
Right.
This extraction.
Right.
Can the benefits ever outweigh the negatives? I don't think so. But coming back to other icons, I think about the British Empire for sure. The sun never set on the British Empire.
Right,
I knew that it would have territories all the way around the world. And of course, I think of Star Wars.
Right.
I think that's the popular culture, sort of the empire these days.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because I was just watching a documentary on Star Wars at the History Channel, and they had a number of religious studies people and even classically trained scholars who work on mythology and art, and they were talking about some of the political resonances at the time in which the film was made, and the way that the empire seems to be depicted not just as empire in general, but as communism. In fact, so that it in some ways it reflects the threat of communism, where you have this kind of monolithic people. All the troopers dress alike, all the military people. So you have kind of, and they all speak with these accents, with kind of almost a British type accent. Most of the figures do. But on the rebellion side, you have kind of this motley crew of people who are quite diverse and fighting for democracy. And so I don't know. They made those connections. I don't know.
And Han, and Lando Calrissian. I can see it.
Right. So I don't know if that's a credible reading, but
well, it gets at the question of identity, which is such a central issue when we're talking about empire. Because another thing that empires tend to do is to try to flatten the identity of its subjects, or at least this is one imperial strategy. We'll see in Persia a sort of different imperial strategy, but certainly if we're talking about, say, the British Empire, I mean, there was this sense that a civilized person knows English and wears wool suits, three-piece suits, and is a Christian, and it was the great duty of the European world to bring this civilizing influence. You spoke English, or if we think about the boarding schools for Native Americans that were started by Christian missionaries in this country in the 19th century, where assimilation was the complete program. You wouldn't speak your native language, you wouldn't be around your parents because they would not be quote unquote civilized, and so empire, I think, in many manifestations tries to sort of flatten and say we have an idea of what it means to be the right kind of citizen of this empire, or the right kind of person, and we're going to try to make everybody be like that.
So maybe the Persian model then is kind of the exception that proves the rule, in the sense that they recognize that this may be a tendency of previous empires, and maybe the Babylonian and Neo-Assyrian, but then they attempt to do something a little bit different, utilize a different strategy.
Yeah, they let you keep your religion, let you keep your mode of dress, but they won't let you keep your money or your crops or your people. I mean, that's the Hebrew Bible gives this very beneficent picture of the Persian Empire, but they were just as good at torturing people as any other empire too. I think that's always really important to remember.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. Okay, this is kind of a longer question, so let me read it out, and then you can respond to whatever part you think is appropriate. In its American form, democracy promises its adherents a voice in government, taxation with representation, a Bill of Rights, and checks and balances that prevent, at least in their intention, any one branch of government from overstepping its authority. What's more, this government is linked to a free market, which also promises equal access to the meritocratic ladder, by which anyone, or so it claims, can climb the ladder. With such a remarkable system, Cameron, are we not free from empire today? What do you think?
So we being people in the United
Yeah,
States?
yes, we should qualify the we. So yeah, and maybe we could even expand it to say, we who are within countries that adopt a form of democratic government, but maybe for simplicity's sake, the America.
Yeah.
Big question.
Well, it's a fascinating question, because the classical understanding of the nation state, that has this sort of sovereign rule and takes over other territories, that is very passé, right? I mean, we are post-colonial. The British Empire has been dismantled, at least,
Sure.
in theory. Forces pulled out in the 60s, 70s, even 80s, and so we are supposed to be living in a post-colonial or post-imperial age. I think, though, the question of resources becomes important again, though, because if we're talking about centralized resources that are taking resources from elsewhere, then I think we have to look to corporations, or this sort of broader question of globalization, that is the economic forces that run the world now. So even if every little country has its own government, they're not necessarily autonomous, because of the way that wealth is concentrated in the world, and that power reigns. And so if we think about oil companies, for instance, which have more revenues in a year than several of smaller countries' GDPs put together, and they go into countries that are resource rich and set up sort of get their tentacles into those governments to make sure that they've got the right deals set up to get these resources. I mean, I think I think corporate money is one new place to think about empire today. So that even if the United States isn't one, it holds a lot of these corporations privately.
Sure, right. It raised an interesting question about the role of technology in that, because on one hand, I think many people see technology, and especially open source type thing, Wikipedia and whatnot, open source knowledge and open source just sort of coding and things like that, as a way of, really as a strategy of resistance. I think of Snowden, right? That's one example where technology has been, I think he would see himself as a kind of resistance fighter, so an intellectual resistance fighter. But if we consider globalization, maybe technology is also a double-edged sword, in the sense that it also facilitates the movement of the market into places it would not have otherwise been.
Right.
So I guess maybe technology has both a Jekyll and a Hyde.
Yeah, I
don't
think that's
know.
well said. And empire itself, I mean, I've already sort of, spoiled a big reveal about the question, is empire good or bad? But I think that's a fascinating question, because semantically, I would construct empire as the bad thing. That is oppressive structures. And let me emphasize that in all of this extraction comes oppression, comes we said sort of a wiping out of identity, or some people are made to work. Enslavement comes with empire. So we can see these kinds of oppressions of people who are other. So in the case of Europe, it's been people of European descent colonizing people who are brown and black and not white. I mean, not European. I mean, that race is a major factor in sort of who gets colonized. So I think So I think I really want to emphasize that the way I'm defining empire is in an oppressive way.
Mm.
Now, if you want to get into the real sort of poli-sci and governmental questions, then sort of how do you have a government, a centralized government that's not imperial? I don't know how to do that. I want to
Yeah,
stick with the
right.
Bible, but I want to recognize that
Yeah.
question is there.
Well, it will be interesting later in this semester. The class will be reading Luther's work on the Two Kingdoms,
Mhm.
which is a classic Lutheran text about how God acts in the world. How God acts on the one hand in the church through the Spirit and through the gospel, and then how God acts through the law in government. And this is, I think, the Shoah and the Holocaust and the rise of Nazi socialism really problematizes that whole argument, especially in its potential to produce quietism.
Mhm.
And I think that probably was there. I don't know. I'm not a history of Germany of that period, so I can't say, but that's often claimed. And so it will be interesting as this class continues to think about, is that a useful Lutheran doctrine still? And how might the Book of Daniel, which to my mind seems ambiguous on this issue. On the one hand, you have moments of resistance where you have Daniel as a figure who does kind of call the king to account in the sense of bringing the king to the point where he will acknowledge God as God Most High. But God has still put that king on the throne somehow. So
Yeah.
there's this real ambiguity. And I think maybe the book's wrestling with those kinds of questions.
Sure.
How do we relate to, we can't use the term secular power, but I think you understand what I'm saying. How do we relate to, power that really is not of our religion and of our people, that's imperialistic?
Yeah, and the kind of resistance strategies that colonized people take on are not always simply, I'm just going to go out and rebel against. I mean, when you're facing this monolithic force, a small group of people taking up arms is not going to defeat the empire's military. But how do you, as an individual, as a family, survive and try to hold on to some of that identity and the values you hold dearest? And sometimes that requires doing what the empire says with a sort of wink, and then
Well
finding ways to subvert that. But then when winking at the empire doesn't stop the Shoah? I mean that there a moral imperative to do more, and how do you sort of discern where that is?
Well, Dr. Howard, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. I'm sure the students will appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Have a great day. Thanks, Cameron. That was
Sure.
fantastic. So much fun.
Oh, that was fun. Gosh, we could